Hello, my name is Gudelia Paula Sowers, and I am the current president of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce. And we have Ruben de Jesus Medina here today, and we're going to learn so much. And I've known Ruben here for the last year and a half or so, and have learned so much about your business. And I so appreciate it. And I just want everybody to hear everything that you have to say. Why don't you just give us a quick rundown? Who is Ruben?
First of all, thank you for having me, Paula. It's always great to talk with you and help the chamber as much as I can. So my name is Ruben Jesus Medina. I'm originally from Mexico City, Mexico, and I'm the founder and managing director of the Furinca Venture Company, which is an entrepreneurial finance and startup advisory firm. We focus on empowering underestimated founders, and that includes, but is not limited to, females, Latin, Black, and veteran founders. Why? Because in the United States alone, less than 20% of venture capital funding at a national level goes to said founders. So we want to change that. In addition, I'm also a venture partner with Valley Capital Partners, which is an early stage Silicon Valley venture capital firm that is focused on investing here in the Midwest. And I'm a double domer. I graduated from Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering and a master's degree in finance. And so happy to be here and support the chamber in any way that I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a couple questions for you. What is the difference between equity finance and debt financing?
Sure. So usually when you think about starting a company, there's two ways to get capital, two ways to fund really the growth of a company. Debt financing is what most people are familiar with, and that's you go to the bank, you get a loan, and then you pay back the loan over time. Now, most banks, though, will only provide loans to companies once they reach a certain point of sales. When a company, if you just have an idea and it's very, very early on, that's usually where equity financing comes into play. And also, a lot of these companies are thinking of, how do I get to going public? How do I get to becoming the next Tesla, the next General Electric? And that's where equity financing comes into play, where at the earliest of stages, friends and family might give you enough capital to start the company. But then as you move along, you'll get institutional funding. That the term equity comes from the fact that they then take ownership in your company. Whereas with debt financing, a bank does not take ownership in your company. However, if you're unable to pay back that loan, then the company does take any assets that you might have. So there's pros and cons to both types of financing.
Oh, that's great. Great to know. Can you describe in general terms what is an entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Sure. So one of the reasons why both my firm as well as Valley Capital Partners is here in the Midwest is we want to be part of creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem around the South Bend area. Why? Because there's great universities here, great research centers, incubators, accelerators, great talent, and it's a burgeoning ecosystem. So what I mean by that is you're starting to see universities that are spending a lot of money in research. And research is great, but if that research never gets to market, it never commercializes, then it doesn't really fulfill its purpose. And so a lot of these researchers are trying to save lives, save the environment, make the world a better place. So what an entrepreneurial ecosystem does is it takes all that great research and it allows it to be commercialized. It allows us to enter the market. And so with that, you have a couple of different stakeholders. One, you have the research laboratories where some of this research takes place, especially deep tech, which is what we invest in. So that's science and engineering companies. You have human talent. So think of all the students at all the different universities and colleges throughout the Midwest. And then you have the financing part. So going back to the equity financing. Now, traditionally, most universities will have some sort of grants that they might provide students. There's also National Science Foundation, some larger public organizations that provide the very, very initial capital for the founder to create a prototype, to get a first 2-3 prototypes to get out to market, start building a team. But then as the company gets ready to scale and grow, there's two other very critical stakeholders. One is institutional investors. Those would be the venture capital firms. And the second are other entrepreneurs in the area that sometimes work as advisors for the younger entrepreneurs. They've been there, done that. They understand the complexities of building a company, the different roadblocks they might face. So it's almost like this advising network that you can then tap into and say, hey, I'm thinking of starting a company that's going to digitize real estate. Okay, well, what does that look like? And then they kind of help each other out. Now, you might wonder, well, why would someone help someone they don't know? In a sense, entrepreneurs help each other out because they're entrepreneurs. It's not easy being an entrepreneur. The traditional way of thinking is you go to school, you graduate, you get a job, and you work there for 20, 30 years. But as things have changed, especially post-pandemic, with a lot of people starting to realize, like, do I really want to do something I'm passionate about? How do I do that? They're really going to keep working. And so entrepreneurs, knowing how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, help each other out. So those would be the different parts of this entrepreneurial ecosystem, from the start of the idea, where the idea is born, and then the support system, both human capital as well as financial capital, to then help the companies go out into the market.
How does a founder begin their journey to build a startup?
Sure. I'd say it's never too early or too late to start. There's a lot of different competitions that we've seen even at the high school level. So if you think back to when students are in school and they have like a science fair, they have all these different activities they might do in school. We've seen some very early entrepreneurs come up with ideas. I mean, here locally, there's a couple of high schools that already have entrepreneurial competitions. So I would say to aspiring founders, one is never too early, and also it's never too late to start. Right. So I was working for 15, 16 years at the University of Notre Dame, and I was in a good spot. But then I had this interest to go out and do something on my own. So two other Notre Dame alumni decided to join me. We started the firm. And then I joined the venture capital firm, which also has, alumni from Notre Dame as well as others. So it's never too late to start either. Now, how do you get started? Well, one, the biggest thing I would say is try to find a mentor. Try to find someone who's been there before. They may not necessarily have been, the next Bill Gates or, pick your famous founder, Jeff Bezos, but someone who understands some of the difficulties you're going to face. Because if you understand them, if you understand how the system works, how you can start a company, what the different stages are, that there's going to be a period where you're going to be burning more cash than you're making. But that's okay as long as your product or service has certain milestones that will eventually make it profitable. It sometimes takes encouraging from others to say, stay on the course, stay the course, you're doing okay. That'll be the first thing. Find a mentor. The other part too, sometimes we get asked, well, I don't know what to build a company around. Sometimes the thinking is that geniuses come up with this great idea, they build it and then take it to market. Look for problems that other people are not solving. It doesn't necessarily have to be an idea that you come up with out of the blue. Some of the best companies in the world have been created simply by people taking a look at something that's not working and saying, I think I can find a solution for that problem. There's something called, do you want to build a painkiller or do you want to build a vitamin pill? A vitamin pill is a nice to have. A painkiller is you need it. Products that you need are those that are going to be the most successful. A nice to have is going to take a lot of marketing, a lot of convincing people for that product or service. Whereas a painkiller, a need, that's something that will certainly be of high interest to any product or market. So if someone has the entrepreneurial bug, we say, stop looking at problems. And it could be something as mundane as you're driving home from work, as you're in school. If you see something where it's a recurring problem and you think you might have a solution for it, that's how founders get started. That's when they say, okay. And I'll give you a concrete example. So most of us are very familiar now with the iPhone or a Google phone or, this device that we carry that has unlimited music. Well, back in the day, I'm still a generation that used CD players. And you had cars that had both CD players and cassette players. The younger generation doesn't even know what those are. But if you think of, well, why did someone come up with the iPhone? And before that, what's it called, the iPod? Well, the problem was you had to keep burning CDs. And so you might remember, some of us on the other generations, that you had to carry a little, packet or different CDs, and you had to remember which CD was which, and then you had to burn them and whatnot. That may not have seen as a pain point back in the day, but fast forward now, would you rather have an iPod or an iPhone where you can just pick whatever music you want, or would you want to take the time to be burning your CDs, carrying the CDs, right? So a pain point may not necessarily be something that hurts, it's just an inconvenience. So when they came up with the iPod, they said, okay, how do I make a device where I can put 1,000 tracks in one piece of gadget versus burning a million CDs for the number of songs? So that's an example of someone thought, okay, this is a problem. I'm tired of burning CDs. I'm tired of carrying them with me. Can I come up with something that can put all that music into one device?
Oh, that's a lot of great information there. So what are the various stages of an entrepreneurial cycle?
Sure. So once a founder has an idea what he or she wants to build or solve, I should say, the first thing is customer discovery. Are there customers out there that are going to buy your product or service at the end of the day? And it's something that's very, very critical that we tell founders is, do you have customer validation, right? So what you're trying to do at first is, it doesn't have to be the complete product. It's what we call the MVP, the minimum viable product. Create something. It could be a gadget, it could be a widget, it could be an idea what your service will provide, and start talking to people. Start saying, hey, I'm thinking of this idea. Would you buy it? Would you take on this service? And that will give you two things. One, validation that your idea is sound or not. And two, what does it look like? Because more often than not, the feedback that you get from the customer will shape and morph the final product. You came up with the MVP, but the final product that actually gets out to market might be a little bit different based on the feedback you're getting from from the customers. What color is it? What are the specs? Do you have this or not? So it's very important to not be too tied to your idea, to your baby, but have that flexibility to say, okay, if I'm discovering customers, is there a market for this? Would people actually buy this? So that's the customer discovery. Then customer validation kind of ties into that, going out into the market. But here, you're more focused on really getting a sense of the size of the market and getting a sense of who are my target audience? Who are the initial people that I will sell this product to? How am I going to distribute that product or service? And so it's almost like a relationship you enter with your customers. So first you're discovering them, and once you figure out, yes, there are customers, then you can just go fully into let's validate the product. Let's make sure that we have from then a minimal viable product to something that's actually going to commercialize. And the third stage then of the entrepreneurial cycle is in customer creation. So think of customer discovery. Let's say you're in school. Your customer discovery might be your classmates, might be just your friends and family, might be your parents, your uncle, your aunt, close friends. You say, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? Customer validation, sticking with the analogy of being in school, that might be your entire class. People you may not talk to on a regular basis, but you're going to go out and say, hey, I'm thinking about it. I just need feedback. And customer creation is you go to the entire school. At customer creation, you're trying to then, quote unquote, officially start selling your product or service. And so those are the three stages in entrepreneurial cycle. There's obviously a lot of little steps within, but those are the big three. Your customer discovery, customer validation, and then customer creation.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh. A lot of great information here. So what is the difference between friends and family, angel investors, and institutional investors?
Sure. So let's say once you get to that customer creation, you're ready to go out and start selling your product or service. The question then becomes, okay, well, how am I going to finance this? How am I going to, create a team? How am I going to pay salaries? How am I going to create prototypes? How am I going to create products? hire engineers, whatever it may be. So there's different types of financing that can help you in that journey. So the first one is friends and family. So as the name implies, you go to your friends, you go to family, say, hey, I need $5,000 to create a prototype. And so everybody might chip in, $100 here, $100 there. You might have some savings if you've already been out working. And so that's kind of a friends and family stage. Now, at that point, what's critical is you're not giving away ownership of your company to create that product or service. The company is still 100% yours. From there, you go to angel investors. So angel investors, that's more, let's say you need $100,000. And that might be, I need, rent space for a year. I need to hire 1 or 2 people, and we need to create more product. Angel investors are usually people you don't know. They're more often than not very wealthy individuals, former entrepreneurs that have reserves and say, yeah, I believe in your idea. I'm going to give you some, money so you can do whatever it is to get to your next milestone. The inflection point here is angel investors could ask for equity in your company. They could ask for ownership, or they could treat it as debt financing. So going back to that first question. So an angel investor might say, okay, you need $100,000. If we go the debt route, it's basically a $100,000 loan from a private individual. And he or she might say, okay, I'll give you the $100,000, pay it back to me in 20 years, in 5 years at, 10% interest or whatever. It's between the two people. If you go the debt route, then you still retain 100% ownership of your company. And I'll get to why that's important in a second. If the angel investor says, rather than you paying me back the money, I'd rather invest that into your company in exchange for X percentage ownership in your company. So they might say, I'll give you $100,000 for the next milestone in exchange for 10% ownership in your company. And I'll get back to that again, the ownership in a second. So that's the change when you start talking to angel investors, usually external. From there, the next step is in the institutional investors. So these are professional organizations. That's where venture capital, private equity come in. And these are organizations that then manage money of other people and then invested in early stage companies with the promise of getting a certain return to the investors. So in the case of, for example, Valley Capital Partners, our first fund was for $55 million. Those $55 million came from other individuals that invested into Valley Capital, and then Valley Capital invested that money into specific companies to help them grow and get to the next stage. Institutional investors will always ask for equity. They don't do debt financing. Once you start talking to institutional investors, whatever investment they make in your company will be in exchange for ownership in your company. I'll pause here because it's very important for founders to understand how expensive equity is. There's only 100% of a pie. That's it. There's only 100%. So you own 100%. And as you start giving away equity, either to fellow, partners, your fellow, let's say you hire talent externally, you give away shares, and/or institutional investors, your piece of the pie will start getting smaller and smaller. And so the counter argument is, well, is it better to have 100% of zero or 1% of $1 billion company, right? What's important, though, is in that process, eventually it's very difficult for a founder to get external financing and end up with 100% of the company. It rarely happens. It's mathematically, it's almost impossible. So you are going to dilute your ownership. And so sometimes aspiring founders might hear, okay, well, how much ownership should I have to maintain control of the company? What about the board? How are they going to affect what I do? So once you get to that point of talking to institutional investors, my advice is that you talk to people who've been there, done that, who understand how equity financing is done, especially for underestimated founders. I'll give you a bad example. So I won't mention names, but a fellow alumni in Chicago. She has this idea of a company, and she was at that stage with angel investors. And she needed $100,000 for a prototype, hire some engineers to do some coding. And she had found an angel investor that was willing to give her $100,000 in exchange for 40% ownership of her company. And she asked me, is that a good deal? The answer is no. Why? Because if that angel investor wants 40% of your company that early on for such a small amount of money, that means that he or she thinks your idea is excellent and wants to take your idea. Okay? And so founders have to be in a position by understand. This is where my firm comes into play. We explain to founders how that math works. If you're trying to raise X money, what is the value of your company? And based on the value of your company, how much you're trying to raise, it should be how much equity you're willing to give away. So rather than a founder saying, hey, I need $1 million, and just hearing what investors throw at them as far as terms, the ideal is for a founder to go to the table and say, I need $1 million in exchange for 23% of my company, and this is why. I value my company at this level. These are the current people within my capitalization table, and these are the reasons why I'm only willing to give away up to 23% of my company. Well, then the investors know that he or she has done their homework. They know where they're coming from. And even 20% is a little bit high, but what I'm getting to is you need to understand the system. You need to understand how equity financing works, because it's very easy to say, yeah, I'll give away 20%, because you think you're not giving anything away, right? It's not like a debt or the bank or loan. But at the end of the day, you might not end up with a company if you give away the entire ownership.
That's so true. Oh my gosh, that is so true. What are the key things that institutional investors are looking for in a startup before they invest?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that we take a look at. The first and most important is we take a look at the team. We take a look at the founder and the team that he or she has created. There, what we're really trying to see is the founder coachable? Is this a person that is willing to hear positive criticism, is willing to work with whatever board he or she creates? It's tough sometimes because the founders think that their idea is the best thing ever, and trying to make them understand, look, maybe you can't do all the bells and whistles right now. Let's start with this, or you cannot. Let's not take the entire world right now. Let's first take a country or two, or a state, or a city. And so that's one thing we take a very, very close look at is the founder coachable. Now, as far as the makeup of the team, no team will be perfect from the start. And so as an engineer myself, I can say this, that usually engineers are great at creating things, but they're not great at selling. They may not have the business acumen necessary for them to actually go out and be the CEO of the company. So usually with science and engineering firms, by the time they get to a certain stage, and I'll get to a stage into a second, you'll have institutional investors come in and say, great idea, great product, great service. Let's bring in an external CEO. Let's bring in an external chief technical officer. Let's bring in an external chief operating officer. And it's not to take away ownership in the company. Quite opposite. Since we've already invested in the company, we're trying to create a team around that founding team to then take that next level, right? So in the stages, you go, friends and family, and then you start angel investors. Then institutional investors come in at what's called the seed stage. So think when you plant a seed and then the seed grows. At the seed stage, these are companies that have some product in market, are starting to get traction. More often than not, usually the original team, and now they're just starting to look to scale. We invest at what's called the Series A, which is the next phase. So in order to get from seed to Series A, you need to get to about $1 million in annual recurring revenue. And then we come in at the Series A and we get them from $1 million in annual recurring revenue to $10 million in annual recurring revenue, which is then when private equity comes into play, when you got the big boys and big girls in Silicon Valley. In that process, it goes back to the team. Is the founder coachable? Can we create a team around them? Are they willing to grow? So that's the first thing, the team. The second thing we take a look at is the size of the market. What is the target market for this company? Is it citywide, statewide, nationwide, global? So we take a look at the market. Then we also take a look at what is their exit strategy. And there's no right or wrong answer. We will ask founders, well, where do you see the company in 5 to 10 years? Are you looking to take the company public? Are you looking to get acquired? Are you looking to merge? And so we want to kind of see what the founders are thinking. Is this a 1-2 year gig, and as soon as I get some money, I'm out, I'll cash out? Or do they really believe in their product or service so they can actually grow into a profitable company that can invest and get to that next level?
Why are you based in South Bend? What is it about the Midwest that is attractive to the Silicon Valley venture capital firm?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, well, one, I went to school here at Notre Dame, so this has been home for a few years now. But we're also seeing that the Midwest is growing, especially South Bend. So you look at South Bend 5 years ago, before Innovation Park at Notre Dame or even its Idea Center was created, there were no venture capital firms in South Bend. Now there's 4 of them, soon to be 5. But then you have the actual state of Indiana that has embraced entrepreneurship. So there's one of the VC funds here at Innovation Park, very good partners of ours. It's called Elevate Ventures. And that's actually a group that I would encourage aspiring founders to take a look at. So Elevate Ventures has a unique model in that instead of it being private capital that they manage to invest into companies, it's state money that they manage to invest into companies. And so there's a mandate from the state government that they want Indiana to be a place where entrepreneurs can build companies and stay in Indiana. And so this, Elevate Ventures, their first fund was about $100 million. And their next fund will be probably twice as much. And this is money that they invest at the early stages. They invest at the pre-seed and seed level. And so we see that from Silicon Valley as this is the state that is going to be generating a lot of great opportunities at the pre-seed and seed level. And so when those companies get ready then for their Series A, we can come in. The other part too, going back to our hypothesis, if you look at the Midwest, and not just Indiana, but Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, even Wisconsin, great universities, great research centers, great incubators, accelerators, a lot of human talent, but not a lot of focus from the VC side, from the venture capital side. Now, traditionally, Silicon Valley will always be Silicon Valley. And there's this hub, this very tight ecosystem where the joke goes that if you go to a local Starbucks, you'll always find a founder and a VC investor sitting next to each other. It's just the proximity, it's there. One of the, if not the only few silver linings of the pandemic is remote work. So now people are realizing, hey, I don't need to go and live in a closet with 5 people in San Francisco just to be in that ecosystem. I don't necessarily need to move as an entrepreneur to Silicon Valley. And there's other pockets that have popped up since then too. You got Austin, Boston, even New York that has a system, a vibrant ecosystem. But the Midwest, though, has largely been not disregarded, but overseen by all these big venture capital firms. So you have very early ideas. You have some funding from universities. In the case of Indiana, you have state funding at the early stages. You do have some private equity shops that's very late stage financing in Chicago, but there's nothing in the middle. And so we see that as if we can be the Series A partner for a lot of these emerging ecosystems, a lot of these, your South Bend, your Indianapolis, even Ann Arbor, they just had their first unicorn minted last year out of the University of Michigan. So we're starting to see this activity be created within the Midwest. The other reason too is what we invest in, deep tech technologies. Think of artificial intelligence, machine learning, Web3, blockchain. A lot of those technologies can be applied to antiquated industries. So ag tech, agricultural technology is a big thing down in Indianapolis. So Elevate Ventures is very keen on what kind of agricultural technology is coming out of the Indiana University system. Because as you know, here in Indiana and in the Midwest, there's always a lot of agriculture. So if you can bring in artificial intelligence, machine learning, not to take away jobs, but to make it more efficient, because at the end of the day, someone needs to control the robots, that could be a great area for disruption from a venture capital side of things. The other part, too, is we see a lot of migration into the Midwest. And for us, a good idea is a good idea. I don't care your color, skin, or your gender. And so as we start seeing these hubs of academia creating great talent from all these different people from around the world, you have an area that's ripe for disruption with new technologies. We think the Midwest is the next Silicon Valley. It's where Silicon Valley was 30, 40 years ago.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Thank you so much, Ruben. This has been great. I really appreciate it. And I know that we'll put all your information down below so that, let's keep that venture capital going. And I think it's very important. And you have any last words before we just...
Sure. So, the reason I got into this, again, is because of that statistic that I heard, that only 2% of venture capital funding is going to people like us, underestimated founders. And so, and for me, it's not a racism thing. For me, it's the fact that if you look at multi-generational wealth that has been created when European immigrants came here in the 1920s, and they created the JP Morgan, they created the General Electric. What has happened is within venture capital, so again, it's a very close community. So who you know really matters, and all these different pockets of entrepreneurs, they become very successful. Usually how it goes is you create a company, you become a multimillionaire, if not billionaire, and then you decide to invest in the next generation. So it's kind of like this flywheel, this circle that gets created, right? Well, with the changing demographics in the United States and around the world, more females in the workplace, more Latin and Hispanics in the United States, more people of different ethnicities coming to the United States, and also entrepreneurial centers popping up throughout the world, like Mexico City, very big on Web3 blockchain, Sao Paulo, very big on fintech, Singapore, London, Toronto. The world's getting smaller and smaller. And so my advice or my recommendation to any aspiring founder is you too can become the next. Pick your company, pick your major founder. There is some risk involved, but at the same time, if you're able to create that ecosystem of support, which we ourselves consider to be part of that ecosystem, there's nothing anyone cannot do. It's going to take work, but as long as you put your mind to it, you could be the next Tesla, you could be the next Amazon. So I encourage everyone who is interested in being an entrepreneur, interested in being a founder, reach out, talk to people at universities, talk to people at your high schools, talk to myself here at Innovation Park, other people. We're here to support this system. We believe in the Midwest, we believe in South Bend, and more importantly, we believe in immigrant founders that are coming to create their, that next generation of wealth, and to, at the end of the day, transform the communities. The last thing I will say is we firmly believe that entrepreneurship breaks cycles of poverty, and it's a way to create wealth, it's a way to change communities, and it's a way for families to grow and become more prosperous.
That's great. Thank you so much again, Ruben. Hasta luego cuando we talk again. Thank you again.
Hasta luego.